Assembly Democrats and the Senate Democrats have something to run on. They have a $15 minimum wage downstate. I mean, that's a really big deal. It's just that happened to get done in March. In terms of the outstanding issues, I don't see anything that pressing that absolutely has to get done.
He stands and he tells the governor openly in a press conference, Governor, downstate gave you your second term. If it wasn't for the 5 boroughs and you're letting us down, we want and need mayoral control. Step up and go put pressure on your buddies, the Republicans in the Senate. How's that narrative?
Give us 22 minutes. We'll give you the World of Albany. There's only 1 week left of session. There's still a lot to be settled. Is mayoral control going to get done? Ethics reform? Fantasy sports legalized? We're going to break all that down with NY1 Albany reporter Zack Fink. He joins us on the phone. I'm City and State Editorial Director Michael Johnson, alongside Editor-at-Large Gerson Borrero, and this is the Slant Podcast Special. All right, welcome, guys. Zack, thanks for joining us on the phone.
Good to be here.
So you've been covering Albany for 5+ years now. I've been doing it for a decade or so. Harrison's been doing it on and off for several decades. We're heading into this last week of session, and I'm wondering if there's going to be anything different than a normal last week of session. What are you hearing up there, Zack? You think it's going to be a typical big ugly at the end of the week, like always?
I think there's a lot of bills, Mike. Like, as always, there's a bunch that come at the end, and they're mostly local bills that are not on anybody's radar necessarily, things people don't care about, changing the tax code in Columbia County somewhere. Many members finally get their bills considered in these last couple days of session. So I think we will see some of that. What I think we're not going to see this year are major policy issues. I think that a lot of work was done in the budget. You had a establishment of a paid family leave program, a $15 minimum wage in parts of the state. It was extraordinarily controversial. It got pushed through. The entire Republican conference, had a very tough time, but ultimately held their noses and voted for it. They are not in a mood to deal right now, pretty much on anything. I mean, I think we'll see maybe something on heroin, maybe we'll see something on breast cancer. You may see something on ethics, although it wouldn't surprise me if we saw nothing on ethics. I think it's going to be a very short menu this time around.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, whenever I approach this end of session, I always ask, what does everyone want? And you kind of hit that nail on the head. That it seems like the Senate Republicans don't necessarily want anything. But just playing this through, what do we think Andrew Cuomo wants? I don't know.
I mean, I think the heroin package, I think he's getting, it's very interesting. They did the I-Stop a few years ago, which prevented people from getting excessive amounts of prescription opiate drugs. They basically prevented doctor shopping and people being able to abuse the system to get multiple prescriptions. Well, what's happened is now people are going out and scoring heroin on the streets. So now we have a heroin epidemic. So they want to do something to kind of quell that epidemic. In terms of what it's going to look like, I don't know. I don't know that the government can necessarily do much. I think the answer to drugs, as we've learned in our, couple 100-year history here, is that really the only answer is treatment. So presumably it's an expansion of that. I know they talked a little bit about some needle exchange. So they'd like to do something around, the heroin epidemic that they call it. Cuomo, on a personal level, is partner of many years, Sandra Lee, had breast cancer within the past year. He would like to do something to address that at the state level, give women, some kind of more options or better funding or whatever it is. We haven't seen the details on it yet. And then finally, something on ethics, but I'm not confident, Mike, we're going to be able to get a package on ethics. I think that there's just no agreement on that whatsoever.
Is there anybody saying from either the Senate or the Assembly side, this is where we've fallen short, or we're not, this must be accomplished before this is over? Even off the record, even in just, expressing concern that it's not going to get done. Is there anybody passionate about any one issue that probably makes sense to the people that sent them up to Albany to represent them?
I don't get the sense that they are. No, I mean, I think that the Assembly, all of these lawmakers are now going into elections, and the Assembly Democrats and the Senate Democrats have something to run on. They have a $15 minimum wage downstate. I mean, that's a really big deal. It's just that happened to get done in March. So, in terms of the outstanding issues, I don't see anything that pressing that absolutely has to get done. I mean, there are other things that have fallen off the table. We had hoped or thought that there would be something on 421A, the tax development, tax break for developers. They were going to hopefully do something around that required more affordable housing. There hasn't been a word about that. It kind of quietly went away, and no one has stated it as a priority. Carl Hastie, the Assembly Speaker, told us months ago that was one of his top priorities, and he's apparently getting pressure from City Hall on it, but it's kind of an issue from the conversation, or is it?
When we think about all of what's going to happen in this last week of session, I think you really do have to think about the elections more than anything. And I think one issue where there seems like there's contention that kind of are coming to consensus on is mayoral control. But I also think that issue is completely about Senate Republicans wanting to get reelected, and also, Mayor de Blasio possibly being wounded coming into 2017 reelection fight. I think right now it seems like a 1-year extension seems likely from Senate Republicans. They also want to do some more oversight for this. How do we see this playing out? Because I really do feel like the only thing Senate Republicans care about when it comes to mayoral control is having a campaign issue that they can talk about coming into these swing districts where de Blasio, is not popular, even though he's not a representative of the districts and kind of the suburbs where I think that it's going to play well by them curtailing his power to some level.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think it's partially a campaign issue. I also think Flanagan needs to hold the coalition together. And the one thing they can all agree on is that they don't like the mayor. So doing something to sort of, mess with de Blasio, giving him 1 year, giving him more oversight, that's a thing they can all huddle together and laugh about. That's basically the one thing that they can all bond together over. It was a very contentious budget. Again, you had defectors at the last minute saying, I'm not voting for this minimum wage, I'm not voting for this paid family leave, and he was able to hold the coalition together just barely, John Flanagan. One area where they all seem to agree is not giving the mayor of the city of New York what he wants.
Is there any chance that they walk away from this without any decision on mayoral control?
I think it's a possibility. I don't think it's a probability. What I think, Gerson, is the likeliest scenario, and we'll see. It'll be a long week. We'll see what actually plays out here. I think what ends up happening are one of two things. Either they have a 1-year straight extension, and they just pass it at the last minute, everybody goes home, or the Republicans in the Senate pass their bill and say, goodbye, sorry, take it or leave it to the Assembly Democrats, and it puts the Assembly Democrats in a very tough position where they've either got to let it lapse or pass the bill they don't like.
Whoa.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility as well, and it's interesting because I think you can't look at this kind of in a bubble because the Senate Republicans maybe would do a 1-year extension or do their bill or something, but I also think they might also try to trade that for something else that maybe we don't know that they want, but they kind of want. But it all comes and gets to that last minute stuff too. Another topic I want to talk about. I mean, we're going to talk about ethics at some point, but I want to save that. Another topic I want to talk about is this fantasy sports fight that's been going on. You've seen all this money pour in the last couple of weeks. Is this just like a typical small issue that is going to get resolved, or is this like a set fight? I know the bill kind of came together, then fell apart, but everything comes together and falls apart at least a couple times in Albany. What are we seeing with that, Zach?
Yeah, fantasy sports. This has really been the Attorney General's initiative here, and I know he went to the legislature. The two chairs of the gaming committees in the Senate and the Assembly, respectively, John Bonasek, Republican, and Garrett Petlow, Democrat, in the Assembly, claim to be shepherding this through. I don't know exactly where it is. I think you're right. I think these things come together, fall apart, and it happens. I suspect we'll see something at the end of the day that the governor can live with. He, from what I understand, has not been terribly engaged in the negotiations about this. He's been sort of like, okay, if you guys can come up with an agreement here, I'm not going to stand in the way. But, he was asked just the other day, I think, about this, and he seems sort of agnostic about it. Just kind of, it's not a top priority of mine, basically.
What are the governor's priority in this legislative session as it comes to a close? I know he's got nominations that go before the Senate. There still is they're not on the calendar to my knowledge. I think he's got 5 or 8 nominations. That's one part of it. So I assume that that's important to his administration and the conduct of business of government. Is there anything that he's passionate about, or he appears to be passionate about ethics and reforms, but is he really in there? Is the governor giving his all, or is all these things that have happened have soured him? Ongoing investigations that are going on that he knows about, Buffalo Billion. There's other things that are pending with a key advisor. Do you see a different Andrew Cuomo in this legislative process as it winds out? Has he lost his passion for this game that he plays so well?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Yeah, I mean, I think that he got a lot done in the budget. That was in March. He can point to that as an accomplishment. Yeah, I don't get the sense he's really itching for anything that big. I mean, he wants to do something on the heroin epidemic. I don't know that makes him or breaks him. I can't really get the sense of how passionately he feels about it personally. My sense is not that much. He wants something on breast cancer. He said that. So that's another priority of his, and presumably ethics. But I just don't think there's much agreement. I mean, he starts in with the campaign finance reform. Republicans don't want that. So, I don't know what it ends up looking like if they're not going to play ball on it. Pension forfeiture is the other thing that presumably everybody can agree on. That's where elected officials who are convicted of crimes lose their state pensions. Both Sheldon Silver and Dean Skelos filed for the pension shortly after the convictions and are set to receive them. The problem is they had an agreement on this last year, and in the budget at the 11th hour, in the vote after midnight, the Assembly pulled the bill and said they don't like it. So now they're trying to negotiate a new bill that's a little more narrow in terms of its wording, but the Senate Republicans are saying, hey, hang on a minute, we had an agreement and you backed out of it. We're not renegotiating this issue. So I think it's very possible, Gerson, that they don't come to an agreement on that, even though it would seem to be, a no-brainer.
Yeah, I wanted to get a little bit more into the ethics and the specifics of it, because, as you mentioned, campaign finance reform seems to be dead. The LLC loophole idea seems to be to some level dead. The pension forfeiture we just talked about. The governor, kind of in what seems like a Hail Mary move this week, launched the independent expenditures thing, which is kind of funny, because I remember last year de Blasio, about 8 days before the end of session, came in with his 421A plan, and everyone's like, oh, this is too late to deal with. But this year Cuomo's like, oh, there's still time to deal with my thing, though, which just kind of points to the larger dynamic that exists right there. But it seems to me like the governor, whatever his motivations are on ethics, I get the sense that he feels like he always has to do something whenever there's corruption, because if he doesn't do at least something that he can go around and tout to the whole state that he tried, or worked hard, or got at least a little bit of an incremental measure, he loses credibility, and then therefore becomes a less effective governor. And he can blame the legislature all he wants, but the governor has famously said in the past that he is the government, and we joke about that term all the time, but the truth is that he takes the blame whenever something doesn't get done. So I feel like this ethics thing is kind of really, even this independent expenditure thing, if it gets done, he just wants something on it to kind of go around with. And, my sense is the legislature's kind of F off, basically, a little bit.
And they've heard
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think, in response to, you had this unprecedented level of corruption with the conviction of both legislative leaders last year. Clearly, I think you're right. The governor feels the pressure to do something. The public says we demand action from Albany. Okay, fine. But what is that going to be? I mean, it's they have also throughout this process tried to explain that there is limits to how much they can do on legislating bad behavior, and there's a fair argument to be made on that side also. But let's back up. The first thing Andrew Cuomo did in his first year was create a brand new, ethics panel, JCO, the Joint Commission on Public Ethics, right? So that was, blew up the old system, created a brand new way of approaching ethics in government. And it turns out that Jacob is kind of a joke. It's kind of failed the test time and time again. The corruption's actually worse since Jacob was established. So maybe, I mean, I just, for whatever it's worth, if anybody was taking, advice on this, maybe that needs reforming. Maybe Jacob has failed in its mission, and that's something they should take a look at in terms of tweaking it and making it a more effective agency.
It's interesting you say that, and you bring up the pinpointing since when the governor has actually made it appear that he's concerned about this. As of right now, of this day, it's 1,715 days since he took office back in January 1st of 2011. He also had a full year of 2010. You covered the campaign, I covered the campaign, and certainly he spoke about this, the need to shut down corruption, end corruption in Albany. And it's all been, a good lip service, and he's give the appearance. So it's like every once in a while he has to resurrect that whole narrative and like he's on campaign. I haven't forgotten about my promise, but it's these guys who don't want to do it. It's always the Republicans or the Assembly that don't want the Democrats in the Assembly. So is he playing this? Is this going to eventually catch up on him? Doesn't seem to have hurt him so far. Even under the worst conditions of having both Shelley convicted and having Dean Skelos convicted. Who else needs to get convicted in order for this to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, the problem, Gerson, it's institutional. It's not necessarily about, passing more laws. I mean, they pretty much every year I've been there, they've done some kind of ethics reform, and it hasn't made a bit of difference in terms of changing the culture. The problem, I think, fundamentally, is the culture of Albany. And Preet Bharara, the U.S. Attorney, who's been going after these people, has been saying that, that this culture of secrecy, the 3 men in a room, everything that's negotiated behind closed doors, a lack of transparency, the fact that, committee meetings are barely publicized. You don't hear about legislation because it's always a secret, until it's on the floor. Albany's way of doing things, the default is hide it from the public. And that's a larger cultural problem that I don't think this governor or any of the leaders are prepared, or at least have demonstrated are prepared to address.
My sense is that, too, when you look at this issue, it's like, if you're actually going to do ethics reform and implement something that works, you're not going to do it in the last couple minutes of session. You're just never going to do it in the last week of session. They're just looking for something to sell that they tried or worked hard or got like a piecemeal thing or a lukewarm solution. And we've seen this before. Like you've said, there's been something passed every single year. They tout it like it's the greatest thing in the world. We know it's not. And that's how like the whole model plays out. And it gets me to this point where I feel like maybe they just care more about the public perception of it than anything else. I think it's more like they need the public perception that they are trustworthy to actually be able to govern well. And I think Governor Cuomo knows this more than anyone else. Like, the second he has any scandal that drops his poll numbers below 50%, he might not recover if he's tainted as someone who is corrupt. And he's been very, very worked very hard to try to avoid that, even though he has had a lot of, pushback on this stuff too. So I think that's where this all dynamic kind of plays out. Zach, we're almost out of time. I don't know if you have any final thoughts on how the session's going to play out next week. Anything specific you're going to be looking for, that maybe people aren't talking about right now?
Yeah, I think for us in the city, the big issue really is mayoral control. That's the biggest thing I need to follow, this week. Yes, there's going to be other pieces of legislation. Yes, we'll cover it. But in terms of the big ticket items, that to me is the biggest. And that is the one that we need to pay attention to and worry about. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I know that the Republicans don't seem very eager to deal on this. So we'll see. But that's obviously a great concern and interest to the people of New York City, because if it lapses, it goes back to the old system, and that's not a place anybody wants to go.
Well, if I were, this is the final thought, so you really can't tell what's going to happen next week. This is my perfect narrative. I would write out the script for Bill de Blasio. He stands and he tells the governor openly in a press conference, the governor, downstate gave you your second term. If it wasn't for the 5 boroughs and you're letting us down, we want and need mayoral control. Step up and go put pressure on your buddies, the Republicans in the Senate. How's that narrative? Would that be the story to carry the end of the close of the session, or what?
I think it would. I think it would. I'd love to see that all play out. I mean, remember, Gerson, also, he hasn't even really been up there. I mean, he was in Albany at the beginning of the week, and then he left in the middle of the week. So he wasn't even in there engaging and talking to the people he needs to strike a deal with.
It never goes well for him when he goes up to Albany. Okay, we're out of time, Zach, but really quickly, do you expect to be home on Friday? I know you live in New York City. Do you expect to be back home on Friday? Or are you worried that you're going to, stay late on Friday, the session's going to go long, and
Good Lord, I hope so, man. I think everybody feels the same way that they want to get out of there. Actually, they joked yesterday that the one thing they can all agree on is they're done Thursday, with or without legislation. So my sense is it doesn't get delayed, but look, crazier things have happened. Last year they extended it by a week. It could happen again, but my hunch is I don't think so.
I hope so for you as well. All right, thanks a lot, Zach.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, guys.
All right, that wraps up this Slant podcast special. Make sure you keep tuned to City and State's website for the live blog we're going to have going all week. Quick updates of what's happening in the halls of the state capitol, some analysis, some opinions, having the whole team kind of weigh in. So it's your one-stop source to find out what's happening if you don't want to weed through all of the Twitter accounts from the Albany Press Corps. Also, always subscribe to the podcast, have your friends subscribe to the podcast, and that's it. That's our show for tonight. Bye.